Today, I want to talk about the hilariously atrocious itemization throughout the entirety of the G2 Fnatic series yesterday. I watched the entire series, and honestly, I was utterly astounded at how bad some of the itemization choices were. And at some point, I thought that these players were honestly just stealing paychecks and completely entering their team. Even though itemization at its core isn't necessarily a primary reason in which a team loses a game, it's definitely a really important part of the game and how you itemize according to your own team's needs, and the composition of the enemy team. And that is something that neither team did very well throughout this entire series. So the first thing I want to talk about is in game one. Honestly, there was something in every game, so we're just going to go through every single game. Starting with game one here, you can see at the bottom, the Jhin on Fnatic side decides to go Static Shiv into Rapid Fire Cannon. This is utterly hilarious. It's almost as if Noah just didn't want to do any damage this game. It's like he picked Jhin, which already makes him useless, and then he built these two items to make himself 100% more useless. So essentially, this Jin's not going to be doing literally anything this game. Static Shiv is a complete bait item on every single champ except maybe Zeri, but even then, I still think Kraken's better. Shiv should never be built. It's complete trash. Same thing with RFC. It's a complete bait item. Anyone who builds it saying that, oh, it has a nice range extension and it feels good, you're completely delusional. One auto attack isn't a range extension. You get the auto attack and then you're back to being useless. The reason this item is bad is because it gives, I think, 30% attack speed, maybe 35%. Compare that to Phantom Dancer, which gives 60% attack speed, and then the same thing on the other stats. In addition, it also has the ghosting effect, so it lets you walk through minions and not be creeped blocked. So Phantom Dancer is literally always a better item. If you want to go a Zeal item, always go Phantom Dancer first. Runaan's Hurricane is also a better option than Rapid Fire Cannon because the way the meta is now, a lot of top laners and supports and a lot of junglers as well are really tanky and really up in your face, so you're going to get a lot of value out of the Runaan's procs. Either way, even though the Jhin looked okay and it was 4-1-1 at the end of the game, Static Shiv and Rapid Fire is utterly useless itemization, and Noah should definitely be permabanned for that. So I'm going to skip into game two here, and let's take a look at what we have here. Ah, yes, the Varus itemization in this game was absolutely hilarious. So when you're playing Varus top lane, and you have press the attack, and you build Kraken Slayer first item, and then you build Ginsu's Rageblade second item, what would be the logical third choice? Okay, if we examine the enemy team, they have Sejuani, they have Azir, and they have Bard. Even Ezreal has a little bit of magic damage, but that's a lot of magic damage. It's also a lot of CC. You're an on-hit Varus. What's the logical next item for you to build? The immediate thing that comes to my mind is Wit's End. It gives attack speed, it gives on-hit damage, it gives magic resist, and tenacity. Literally everything you would be looking for. But Broken Blade does not do this. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit further to see if we can get a peek at this. We see half of it here. Let's go and skip a little further ahead. Fast forward. Yes. By the end of the game, I'm going to go ahead and pause. We see the Varus has built both a Verdant Barrier and a Seeker's Arm Guard. Broken Blade did this later in the series as well when he played Varus top. I can't even begin to understand the thought process behind this. It's completely ends. He completely griefed his team this game. Honestly, if he had built properly, just going Wit's End third, he would have had a whole nother item completed. I don't know at all what his thought process is, building into Verdant Barrier, and then half Zonias, and then an NLR. It just makes absolutely no sense. It's like he just wants to be useless and grief his team. So that in and of itself is absolutely terrible int itemization on the Varus top lane. In addition, the Maokai itemization is also terrible this game. I'm not going to throw Yike under the bus completely here because most Maokais do this these days, but the entire concept of Maokai being an AP jungler or an AP threat, similar to the Zyra or the Brand or the Karthus or the Fiddle, is completely delusional, misled, and you just don't know what you're talking about if you actually believe that he offers the same kind of AP threat that those types of junglers do. Maokai is a tank champion, so you should build him as a tank champion. If you want to have an AP threat on your team in this comp, just have Kai'Sa go full AP poke. That's her best build anyways, and what pro players should be doing, but they don't. And instead of doing that, the Maokai goes Leandries first into Warmogs into Abyssal Mask. So he just can't make up his mind whether or not he wants to go AP or tank. And the tank items he does build are utterly atrocious. Warmogs is super overrated now. Keep in mind, the only reason Warmogs has become meta in the past couple patches is because they added 10% move speed. They didn't change anything about the stats or the health regen, as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong. The only thing they changed is they added 10% move speed to the item when the healing passive is active. And so I don't understand. It's a good item, don't get me wrong, but it's being pretty overbuilt in my opinion on tanks especially. And then lastly, about the Maokai, the Abyssal Mask is utterly atrocious. What this item does is it shreds enemy team magic resists when you're near them. And if we look at Fnatic's team, they have literally not built a single item of magic resist, with the exception of a Locket of the Iron Solari and a Negatron Cloak. That's it. In addition, G2 has no magic damage on their team. They have 3 ADCs, so who exactly are you shredding magic resist for? You have no legitimate AP threat to be shredding magic resist for. It just makes absolutely no sense, and it proves 1000% that these players can't think. They can't use their brain cells and realize and try to thought process through, what items they should be building, what runes they should be taking. It's really, really sad to see. And most of these games in this series, the itemization shows how little pro players are able to think. So that was pretty much it for. The last thing I wanted to talk about in game 2 here is Fnatic's complete lack of a Frozen Heart. Cassante did end up picking up the Randuin's Omen by the end of the game, which is good. However, Frozen Heart would be better. Why? Because Randuin's, while it is a really underrated item and the highest armor item in the game, it's really good into crit users. And if you look at G2's ADCs, only the Lucian is itemizing crit this game, meaning that Frozen Heart is 1000% better. Why? Because it gives almost the same amount of armor, it gives mana, but the big thing about Frozen Heart is the attack speed slow aura. When you're near enemy champions, it slows their attack speed by about 15 or 20%, I want to say. And Varus, Lucian, and Kai'Sa are all auto-attacking a lot, meaning that item is going to get a lot of value. It's really astounding that you have 2 full committed tanks in the Cassante and the Sejuani, and a tanky support Bard, and none of them are able to build Frozen Heart. Even the tank Azir, which we've been seeing recently, and well, for the past year or so. Side note, I'm really, really pleased with the Humanoid's itemization. He actually decided to do damage this game, so really nice job there. But the complete lack of a Frozen Heart on 3 committed tanks is just astounding to me when you're into 3 auto-attacking ADCs. Makes absolutely no sense, and another display of how pro players cannot think. So game 2 was actually much worse than game 1. We had Troll Varus itemization, we had Troll Maokai itemization, and we had no Frozen Heart into 3 auto-attacking ADCs. So heading into game 3 here, we don't see as big issues as we did in the game 2, but just a couple things I want to point out. Again, Static Shiv on the Jhin is completely troll. I guess I should point out what a proper Jhin build should be. Hansama actually did do a decent job this game outside of the Static Shiv. I'm pretty sure Jhin itemization should literally always be Collector into LDR into Infinity Edge. You can even go Infinity Edge second and LDR third, but those are really always going to be your core 3. And Jin's actually going to do a pretty solid amount of damage at that point. Static Shiv, again, complete bait, does no damage. Thank goodness Hansama didn't build RFC this game. But either way, your core 3 on Jhin should always be Collector, LDR, and iEdge in whatever order you really want. But either way, the Static Shiv, like I said earlier, is really, really bad. Also, a side note, I don't know why Jhin was being picked in this series. Throughout the entire series, there were a crap ton of ADC bans, but you still had champions like Kog'Maw, Twitch, and Vayne all available, and with how tanky the meta is, especially like in this game, when you see Ornn, Sejuani, and Rell on the enemy team, what makes you think that Jhin is a good pick in this game? I mean, you can see at the bottom of the screen here, it looks like he's doing a lot of damage, but that's because he's hitting squishies with his ult. He's never actually going to be able to cut through the tanks at all, in which case Cog, Vayne, Twitch, any hyperscaling ADC is going to be able to cut through those tanks super effectively. The Jhin is probably the worst tank killing ADC in the entire game. So overall, the Jhin itemization in Game 3 was better than Noah's was in Game 1 for sure, but still he did end up building Rapid Fire 4th. So he did end up having 2 pretty useless items, but at the very least he didn't build them first 2, and he had the LDR and the eye edge, which is better. Also, to add on, I think it was really funny that Noah actually ended up changing out several items by the late game because he realized that the items he had was pretty useless. The eye edge and the LDR are really, really solid. Shield bow, I'm not a huge fan of, but it's understandable if you really want some lifesteal and survivability. In that case, I usually like to go Bloodthirster because it's a huge AD stat spike, which Caitlyn actually uses really well. Caitlyn is probably the best ADC at utilizing attack damage, other than maybe Jhin, of course. But the shield bow, I don't really like ever because it's just a worse version of Bloodthirster in my opinion. Lastly, he also built RFC, which honestly, if there were a champ to build it on, I'd say Caitlyn is the most acceptable, because if you get an RFC proc comboed with a headshot, it's really long range and it's a really big chunk of damage right off the bat. So that's more acceptable than it was on Jhin, but still I'm not a huge fan of the item. And I just find it funny that he ended up swapping out a lot of his items in the late game. He started out with a collector, he sold it for RFC. I think he sold his shield bow, he started out with collector and swapped it to LDR. And I want to say by the end he swapped out either shield bow or RFC as well. Additionally, the last thing about Caitlyn itemization here is that GA is utterly, utterly useless. GA really is an overpurchased item, an overrated item in general, but especially on ADCs, it's just completely useless. You're rezzing into death most, if not all of the time, and it just doesn't get the intended value. Like I said, if you really want survivability as an ADC, you build items like Shield Bow, Bloodthirster, that obviously gives shields and lifesteal. So those are survivability stats that are much better than GA, where you end up just immediately reviving and dying anyways. So just to recap, Game 3 itemization, Jhin, mediocre, not terrible, but definitely not great, and Caitlyn was pretty bad overall. So let's go ahead and skip forward to Game 4 here, see if we can spot anything out later in the game. Okay, so here we go. We have Broken Blade playing the same Varus top lane pick, and he does the same exact thing as he did the other game. Even though obviously his score looks really good this game and he performed pretty well in the win, that doesn't make the itemization good. Again, your Kraken Slayer, your Grinsu's Rageblade, your PTA, your on-hit Varus top lane. What's the logical choice to go as a third item? Okay, Zhonya's is completely acceptable this game. It's Renekton, it's Lucian, it's Kai'Sa. A lot of AD threats. In addition, Zhonya's helps negate the Renekton and the Leona dive very nicely. So Zhonya's is completely acceptable. But why are we building components of both Banshees and Zhonya's before we complete an item? I don't know why he's trying to build Banshees at all in the first place. If you're really that afraid of Brand, just build Wit's End. It's literally better than Banshees. Banshees is an awful item, and Wit's End fits the on-hit Varus better anyways. So I have no idea what Broken Blade is doing here. He should just build into Zhonya's third, Wit's End third, and the other one fourth. It doesn't really matter. Just anyone who builds components and then like components of 2 items at the same time, absolutely terrible decision making, really terrible troll itemization there. Again, your score isn't indicative of your itemization and whether or not your play is actually good. A lot of things can go right, a lot of things can go wrong to make your score look bad, when in reality you're not really thinking through or using any thought behind your decision making, and that's pretty clear here, as you can see in Broken Blade's itemization. So honestly, not a whole lot else to say in Game 4. I'll fast forward a little more, but I'm pretty sure the game's about to end here. Pretty solid itemization from everyone else. No real glaring issues from what I can see. However, I do want to point out one thing, and this is about AP junglers in general right now, especially Brand, Zyra, Karthus, Fiddlesticks, most of these champions that utilize burns really well. My question is why pro players refuse to build both Liandry's and Blackfire Torch at the same time. These are really good items comboed together. Blackfire Torch burn stacks with Liandry's burn. Blackfire Torch gains more AP when Liandry's burn is active. They're just really good items to combo together, and I don't understand why pro players refuse to buy both of them at the same time. Like if I were Brand at this game, anytime I play Brand in the jungle, I go Liandry into Blackfire into Rylai's, and those are your core three. You're going to be really well off in that case. So I don't understand why pro players just refuse to build both Liandry's and Blackfire Torch at the same time. It makes no sense to me, but to each their own. If you don't think it's that good, perfectly fine. I just don't understand why that's being done. Anyways, heading into game 5, we're going to skip a little ways into the game here, see if we can catch a peek at the scoreboard. So here we go, Noah on Jhin again, absolutely trolling. And again, this is another example of someone that has a good scoreline and looks like they're doing really well in the game, but their itemization isn't indicative of actual good thought processes. And Static Shiv into RFC is just utterly useless. It doesn't do anything. The only reason he did well in terms of score this game is because he got snowballing pretty early in these mid-game team fights, as you can see, ended up getting a lot of gold pretty quickly. So he was able to snowball items and get some pretty free item completions there. So the Jhin itemization, like I said, is really, really bad. It should always just be Collector into LDR into Infinity Edge, or Infinity Edge into LDR. Bloodthirster as well is really good on Jhin because, like I said earlier, he probably utilizes attack damage the best out of any ADC in the game. Also, Twisted Fate itemization is really, really bad this game. Why? Because he built RFC, really useless item. If you're going AP Twisted Fate and really trying to utilize those gold cards, it's pretty good to have that extra range because, wow, look at that. TF actually does utilize one auto extension really well because his gold card is such a core part of his kit. But when we're going AD attack speed Twisted Fate, it should literally always, always, always be Kraken Slayer into Ginsu's Rageblade, and that's pretty much it. Just other on-hit AD attack speed items. RFC really doesn't belong. It doesn't really do anything for the ADTF. Like I said, the stats on Rapid Fire Cannon compared to Phantom Dancer is just a joke. So Phantom Dancer, if you want to build a Zeal item, is really always your best option. Also, last but not least, the Nidalee itemization, while acceptable, is not optimal in my opinion. I like to play Nidalee as more of a, I'm just going to pause here so I don't run out of video, but the Nidalee itemization I like to go for is basically just playing her as an AP assassin and going into Lichbane and things like Protobelt and just more AP focused options, Shadow Flame, Rabadons, and so that makes your spears chunk way more, and your Cougar form combos do a lot more burst damage. I just don't really understand the concept or the thought process behind the Liandry's. It's almost like you're accepting that you're a useless champion, you're not going to land any spears, and so you just depend on the enemy team running over traps to get a little bit of damage off. The Horizon Focus is, okay, it's acceptable, and I understand why people build it. But again, especially in competitive play, at play this high level, you're not really going to be landing spears consistently and getting good value out of that. And you can see he's going into Zhonya's third, into 3 ADCs, perfectly acceptable. It's completely fine. I'm just not a huge fan of the Liandry's, primarily on Nidalee. And it's just funny as a side note, Nidalee's still just a dog meat useless champion, and you also saw throughout the entirety of this series, I'm pretty sure Renekton lost every single game it played, except maybe game 4 if I remember correctly, but the champion is just utterly useless. And Nidalee, if you watch, I forgot which one it was, but one of the dragon fights in this game, you see Nidalee miss 3 spears in a row, and then he landed a spear on the 1 HP Braum and helps finish off the Braum. So proving Nidalee, useless champion, literally doesn't do anything. So if you're in competitive and you want to draft a solid team comp, don't pick Renekton and don't pick Nidalee, and actually think about your itemization. That's the entire point of this video. I'm not really here to, scrutinize pro players or throw them under the bus. I'm here so we can actually learn how to think about the game and think about what items we're building, what runes we're taking. These little things add up and actually do make differences inside of the game, and that's why I'm here to show us how to think and teach you guys that, just because pro players do it doesn't mean it's correct. So, this entire series was just a comedy of errors in terms of itemization throughout all 5 games. Even though the gameplay was really entertaining and fun to watch, an exciting 5-game series as always, the itemization was just absolutely atrocious, pretty much across the board. A lot of errors from the Jhin itemization to the Maokai itemization. To just different things here and there, and no Frozen Heart into 3 ADCs. Like, it's just this kind of stuff that really shows the inability to think for a lot of pro players. Thanks for watching. See you next time.